Well, today is the day that I picked up the DC to DC charger, so this is going to be the solution, hopefully, to the power issues that we have going into the dead of winter. Of course, in the summer, I don't generally have any issues. It's just when we get down to the dead of winter, but I have encountered a few issues if I get a few cloudy days in a row. And so I picked up the DC to DC charger. I'm doing a 20 amp. And the reason I'm doing the 20 amp is this is not really my primary means to charge. It is a means to give me some backup charge, or if I have to top up the batteries, we have cloudy days. At the bare minimum, running the engine with this for an hour should give me enough power to get me through the night to run heat, run the refrigerator, and things like that. Now, the other reason you do the DC to DC is I have not changed the alternator in my van. The Promaster's default alternator is 180 amps, which is a little bit beefier than your standard car alternator because they realize people are going to be doing things like customizations, but it's not the overkill like the 200 or so. Now, if you're swapping out your alternator, you need to make sure you give it a lot of load. If you have a high output alternator on your vehicle and you're not actually using that, you can actually damage the alternator. So you need to have a little bit of a better power idea. Now, the Renogy one is one of the better ones. This has the ability to, it will have the ability to top off the battery. It will upregulate the voltage so that we can top off the battery. And these also do not drain the alternator. If another solution is your battery isolation modules. But what those will do is when your car is running, it'll be like, hey, let's use the house batteries now. And then it toggles over from the car battery to the house battery. And if you have lithium, that can really suck and put a lot of strain on your alternator. And so you don't want to do that. These guys are a lot more efficient. They're a lot better for both your house batteries and for your alternator. And so that's kind of why I went with this model. Now we have on this side, we have, this one is going to be your input. So this comes from the car battery. And then over here, your output goes to your house battery. You can toggle these for any type of battery situation. So there's some dip switches over here. And I have mine set in off, on, off. So 1 through 5. That tells me that it's a lithium battery. We're going to ignore any float charges. We're going to be pushing out a 14.4 volt, which is what the manufacturer would recommend for my particular custom built batteries, utilizing the individual custom cells. Now, the other thing that this one will have, this has a temperature sensor, which you don't use with the lithium batteries anyway. It's not included. We have a current limiter if you wanted to use that. And what you do have to have on the Renogys, and what very few people talk about, is how to plug in your D+ line. I'm going to give you 2 options in this video for how to do that. There's a little bit more of a complicated, but probably a better route. And there is a much easier, less complicated route, but has a few disadvantages. I'm going to go ahead and cover both of those ways in this video because a lot of people are like, hey, here's my wiring of the DC to DC charger. And then you see all through the comments, where'd you do your D+? Where'd you do your D+? Where'd you do D+? Because that's the downside of the Renogys. They have to have that D+ line or it won't work. Most of your other DC to DC chargers, they will detect when the engine is on and only work when the engine is on. This one doesn't do that. That, I don't know, might be more of a problem than anything else. Maybe they should redesign these to do that. But there are advantages to doing this section here, where if it is wired correctly, it will always be safe. And if it is not wired correctly, it could get you into some problems. And so that's what we're going to do. So what we're going to do here is, first is, where am I mounting this? Then we're going to start running a little bit of the wires, and then we're going to be talking about the where the D+ switch goes into, and then we're going to put in a switch. And that's kind of what it is. So hopefully this video will help you if you're looking at installing a DC to DC charger yourself. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to gather our supplies. I'm going to talk about everything that we're doing just to get this guy installed. Obviously, we do need our DC to DC charger. Duh. But now we're going to need some wires. Now, consult the documentation. They have a very nice document about how far are your lead wires running, how much, what gauge do you need. So in my case, what I did is I'm only running it less than 10 feet total. And so 10 gauge wire is going to work. And I went online to get 10 gauge wiring that these are actually a more of a silicone threaded, and they are very thick. Very good, very safe wires. And I got a 25-foot black and a 25-foot white, red, excuse me, so that we have enough and I can very easily separate out my positive and negative line as we are running the wires. Now you're going to need to go in and look at what battery terminals you need. So my terminal blocks are 5/16 on both the car battery and on the house battery. And so what I did is I bought these really good gold-plated terminals where which are 5/16 on each side. So I just basically got a small pack of them so that I will have enough terminals to do everything that I need. Now you need to run fuses. You need at least 2 inline fuses. So I picked up these inline fuse packs. Now again, I bought these online because I could get them at the same gauge wiring as I'm using. That is important. You don't want to go from the, you can buy these fuse blocks at any auto parts store or at Walmart or whatever else. But what I noticed in all of those is that the wiring going into them were usually 14 or even 16 gauge wiring going across. You don't want to run 10 gauge wiring, then into 14 gauge, and then back to 10 gauge. You're going to have a bottleneck of energy. It's going to overheat and possibly do some weird things with the current. So I bought these specifically that are also 10 gauge wires. And these extra bonus that had some of the fuses I need, and the ones I don't need, I'm just going to throw in my box of spare fuses. So make sure you have your inline fuses. I do want something to run my wires safely, so I wanted to get the better full conduit. They didn't have any of that, so I just got this flex conduit instead. It'll work just fine. We need a wire for the D+. They specify that can go from a 14 to an 18 gauge. I got 25 foot of 16 gauge simply because the store had 16. I wanted 18, but the store had 16, so that's what we're doing. Since I want to operate this not always when the engine is on, but when I want to when the engine is on, I have a toggle switch. This is your advantage of running the Renogy one, whereas your DC to DC chargers that automatically sense when the engine is on and push power, they can strain the alternator when you don't necessarily want it to. This power switch is going to cut off that power to that D+ line so that I can choose when it's running and when it's not, as long as the vehicle is on. So I have one of those as well. And then that meant that I got some disconnects just to plug into the back of that. And if I have to run any small wire anywhere, I can, use the disconnects, male to female disconnects. In my case, this is an optional for you, but I have some zip ties and mounting brackets, which I'm going to use to mount the power switch. And then, of course, we do have some cable clamps to run the wires that we need to run whenever we need to run those. And the other option that we need is how are you going to run your D+ line? What I'm actually going to use is I'm going to use the auxiliary plugs, which is how you're supposed to do it, although most people don't do it that way. So I had to buy this little accessory pack that just happens to have a couple of the bullet plugs that I will need for that. If you're going to do it the way most people will do online, where they're going to piggyback off of a fuse and the fuse box, you will need a piggyback jump circuit. So you could do either way. There's reasons I'm opting not to do this, and I'll explain those when we get to actually adding the D+ line. And so that's the basic equipment. As far as the tools we're going to need, make sure you have yourself just a standard power drill and a basic screwdriver, no big deal there. And you are going to want some wire crimpers, wire cutters, crimpers, strippers, all that kind of stuff. And get a voltmeter that you can measure DC current. Not every voltmeter measures DC current. This one here does. And I specifically bought this one despite I had a decent voltmeter, but my decent voltmeter did not have direct DC current with the loop. This guy here is going to make it a lot easier to measure current without having to do anything else weird in the mix. But But really, those are all the pieces of equipment we need, just kind of your basic tools and the equipment. So let's go ahead and start tearing things apart and show you what we need to do here. So the instructions for the DC to DC charger tell you to mount your charger as close to the house batteries as you can. So I have this guy down here, which is easy enough to remove. I usually need 2 hands to do it, but this is actually down where my battery and other electrical components are at. So now with this guy off, all my battery components are down here. There is a look at my home brewed battery built with individual cells. And then this guy there is a converter. This converts AC power to DC power to charge off of a house outlet. And up here is my pure sine wave inverter. This is the guy that gives me electricity to my AC power outlets. And then up here, behind all this stuff over here, there is the charge controller back there. See that where we're at right now, we're drawing about 60, oh man, we're drawing in 20 amps. Nice. That's actually the same draw that the DC to DC charger gets us. So the charger, as I said, is already mounted. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to mount it right over here. The 2 terminals you're looking at on this side are your input terminals, and then if we roll this guy around this way, you can see these are the output terminals, and that top little wire is your D plus switch. So we are going to talk about where to put the D plus switch at. And let me go ahead and roll around this way, and you can see my battery terminals. So I use the battery terminals are the big blocks. I don't use the terminals on the battery itself. There is our negative or ground, and our red, of course, are positive. And note that your fuses on a DC circuit get fused to your positive lines. This fuse here, check documentation. I think this one is a 25, and I think the one up front is 30. Or this one, no, this one's 25, and the one up front I think is 20. I think that's what they're fused at. So we'll go ahead and show you how I got this guy mounted, ran the wires, and stuff like that. so we have this guy mounted in. I have my terminal switches here, front and back. My D+ line is over on the other side, which I'm not sure we're gonna be able to see that. Certainly not. I'll show you a bit when I have more time. Now we ran the wiring up there, zip tied it to the old conduit, and then we have it tying in over here, and then the conduit is tied behind the gray conduit. You can see some over here. I'm gonna put one more zip tie over there. And then we're feeding over there, and I'm still working on wiring the front, but that's how we have this part wired. And we'll get to the rest in a bit. All right, so we're in the front here. Let me go, zoom out. So we're gonna take off, there's 3 screws on the part that goes here. One up here, here, and here. We're gonna take those off. Then we need to loosen these screws just to get out around it. And then there's a screw here, so we need to take off 3 screws to take off the cover around this. Pull that off, and now we can pull this bottom piece out. And you can see down here, this is where a lot of the wiring is routed. And so we have plenty of room down here to route our wires down. Route them down here. We can clip them into some of these that are open and available. And we can run them right down into this, which goes into the battery compartment right down here. All right, so these are the 2 wires here. Routing around, just open up these clips here, ran them all the way through here, keep them nice and managed, and then run them right down here underneath into the battery compartment. So now we're just gonna go ahead and reassemble all of this. So that's all put back together, and then I'll focus on my battery. All right, so we ran on the black terminal over here, or light over there. I did not have this size nut. It's metric, so I wanted to put another nut here, but I didn't for now. Maybe eventually I will, but for now I just tied it into there. Then under the box here, I just tied it onto the linkage to the fuse, so it's right here going out this way, and this is going to allow me to swap my fuse in right here easily. So that'll go right there, and then I'll go around that way, so very nice. And of course the other black wire is tucked way under there. So that'll work. As soon as I put fuses here and in the back, we'll be all set. So I'm gonna go ahead and get ready to run the D+ wire now. Okay, so one option of doing your D+ is to find the fuse box under the steering column. And this 20 amp fuse here goes to the passenger side window. And so what many people do is piggyback off of this and run the piggyback on the fuse back to your D+. This is going to have the advantage that it's very easy to do and doesn't require any weird wire running. The disadvantage is, even though it generally is only on when the car's on, it also is on when the accessory mode is on, which means that the battery could still be drawing off of your car battery after the car is stopped. And so that's on like a 20-minute delay, so you can, still run the windows for 20 minutes after shutting the car off. That's why I'm not opting to do it, but it is an easy way to do, and it will work with a switch that we have, so you can manually do that. We're actually going to wire it though somewhere else. All right, so if you go over to your sliding door and then down on the bottom, there's this panel over here. Four screws total, 2 on this side, 2 on the other side right inside the door. And then now if you happen to have the uplift kit, you're gonna have an extra fuse box over there. We don't have the uplift kit, so what you see here is, so this is a separate relay which is going to have a lot of different connections. Now there is documentation for this, but we found the documentation is not quite accurate. So what I did is I ran some probes in there, and we did this with it. So we probed each one of them with the engine on and each one of them with the engine off. You can see in column 3, the last row, that is only on when the engine is on. Technically, it's only on when the accessory is on. But when you turn the accessory off and pull the key out, unlike the passenger window, that voltage drops to 0. So what we're going to see is that is going to be the ideal place to plug that in. So I bought a little bullet adapter. We're just going to tie into that, and then that's going to be what we plug into the D+ line wired through the switch. So there you have where the terminal's plugged in there. Now I left it a little bit of extra slack because I'd like to throw a fuse on that. So I'm going to go ahead and throw a fuse on that when I can. I don't have an extra inline fuse. It's probably not necessarily important to have it, but it's good. All right, so you can see all this is put back together, and then our little D+ wires coming out here, and you can see it poking right out here under the seat clamp there. And then it runs under here, right there, and then it's running under this. See, it's there. I can cram it back a little bit further. Then right here, and then what it's going to do is go back down there under the mess behind the refrigerator, and then it's going to come up this direction here, and you'll see that there's two of them now. And the reason there's two of them is we are on a switch. So right down underneath here, the one wire comes up, and then the switch wire goes down, and then that's going to go back to the individual unit. So this is a lighted switch, but we're not using the light at all, so left that one out so it just doesn't illuminate, which no big deal there. And then coming down here under the refrigerator, and then you can see here where our wire is. The D+ line is right inside here, and it's up here with zip ties holding it up. And this is our positive and our negative wire for that. Sorry, you can't see that super well. Let me adjust that. There you go. So now we have our positive and our negative here, and our D+ here going on over to the unit. And now here is our final setup over here. These are the wires that are coming in from the engine up here. They are coming down into this. And then your D+ wire, hopefully I can get around and seeing it. Your D+ wire goes into your D+ line. So this guy will only turn on if the engine is on and that switch is toggled. So far, after 3 months, DC-DC charger works excellent. Anytime I've used it, it works great. It pushes out a cool 20 amp exactly when the thing is actually charging. All right, so now that the DC-DC charger is installed, all we need to do is start up the engine, and then come back here and hit this toggle switch, which I can easily reach when I'm driving. And then once you hit this guy, you're going to be drawing in 20 amps of power as long as that guy is running, which is a very good thing to charge up your system. So overall time, only about 3 hours to get this guy installed, maybe 3, maybe 4, I don't know. We took a break halfway through just for the fun. But anyway, works out great. Hopefully this video helped you figure out your DC to DC charger, including the D+ line. And with that, thanks for watching, everybody. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so. Turn on those notifications, and we will see you a little bit further down the road.